I'm so pleased that Kaleidoscope is finally here, and hopefully lots of you will have been enjoying all the talks today. We've had so much interest in this section, and I know that it's a really big topic for organizations at the moment. How can we be making the case for investing in wellbeing? So I'm really excited to be joined by two, well, how do I say this? Two powerhouses of wellbeing, really. Both Arti and Claire have done fantastic jobs of leading the way in their respective organizations. And I'm so pleased that today we have the opportunity for you to learn from them. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This session will be 35 minutes long. Please post your thoughts in the chat. We would love to get through lots and lots of questions, and hopefully we can touch on a few, but because we're short on time today, we're going to make the most of this discussion, but please let us know your thoughts as we go through. My name is Daisy Abbott, and I've been with the Unmind team for just over 2 years now. And my role here, I have the absolute pleasure of working with our largest global businesses, companies like Ocado and BAE Systems, who we're joined with today. Really, my role is helping these organizations to come on board and join the Unmind family, but being much more proactive and data informed in this space. So really today, I'm just delighted to be facilitating this discussion, and I would love to hand over to Claire and Arti to introduce themselves. So Claire, why don't we start with you?
Thanks very much, Daisy. So Claire Walsh, I am the Health, Wellbeing and Injury Prevention Manager for UK and the rest of the world in BAE Systems, and I work in the corporate SHE team. So I've been a health and safety practitioner for 25 years, and throughout that time I've had a real interest in the health part of health and safety. So I've been with BAE for 5 years, and my role in this team is to gather all the great work that's been done in all of our different business units and standardise and share that across, so that your experience as an employee is the same whether you work in our subs business, our air business, applied intelligence, no matter what country you're in. And a huge part of that is all about mental health and well-being at work. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. Arti, over to you.
Yes, thanks everyone. So hi, I'm Arti Kashyap-Aynsley. I am the Global Head of Health and Wellbeing for the Ocado Group. I joined Ocado just 6 months ago, which is crazy to think that it's been 6 months already. And previous to this, I'm like, Claire, I feel like I don't come from a background of many years in health and wellbeing. I'm actually a token professional services junkie. So I've spent 15 years between PwC and Deloitte and worked across audit, advisory, tax and management consulting, which is where I spent the bulk of my career. In the last 3 years that I was with Deloitte, I switched gears into the health and well-being world, and there's probably a couple of reasons that spawned that. One is from a personal interest standpoint, similar to Claire, moving into the area that she's in. I qualified as a PT and as a life coach, and also just had my own challenges with my own physical and mental health my whole life. So for me, it was a lot that I just was involved in my personal life. And the second element is that in working in the professional services industry, you learn to live a life of constant burnout. You realize how toxic and unhealthy the environment can be at times, but also at the same time, how incredible it can be for your career. And for me, as I started to get more senior, it was really important for me to start to switch and turn the narrative around turning that environment into something that was seen as something where people could thrive, and being able to look at ways that we could empower our people to do that. And so the last 3 years I spent developing the strategy for Deloitte UK in consulting, and then just 6 months ago joined Ocado, and that's me. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I think the really interesting thing about this discussion is that both Ocado and BAE Systems are very different organizations, but the two of you come from super different roles as well. So I'm really looking forward to the differing examples that you can give. And we've got hundreds of people listening in. So yeah, really looking forward to kicking that off. Before we go into some questions, I think it's fair to say that we are all aware the impact the pandemic has had on mental health. I don't think any of us could have envisaged what that would mean for employees in their workplaces. And I'm sure we've all talked about this silver lining of the pandemic, whereby we're now all talking about mental health, and we're now seeing much more investment in this topic. certainly businesses can't ignore that further adversity could be around the corner, and how do we equip people to be adaptable ultimately? And we know that our people are our most important asset. So really keen to understand from the two of you, how have you gone about gaining support, gaining investment in mental health initiatives, and really what some of those examples might be. So I think starting with the idea of the fact that this has been talked about so much more over the last 18 months. I would love to hear from the two of you, how did you go about turning what was a boardroom discussion into actual action? And why don't we start with you, Claire? How have you gone about gaining support for the mental health initiatives that you've deployed?
Thanks very much, Daisy. So one of the main opportunities that I got was obviously coming into this corporate SHE team role last year, was then the opportunity to look around and see what was going on in the marketplace, look at what was going on in the business, and really take a proper look at what was going on in terms of how the pandemic was affecting our employees. So I started off by pulling together, like I said, some of the examples of all the fantastic work that was going on throughout the business in the different areas. But what became really, really apparent was that in many cases we were doing the same thing twice or three times when we could actually do it once and just do it really, really well. So I started looking into how we could do a lot more around, like I say, sort of providing that offering to employees, one that would give them a benefit, but also to then think about what me as a health and safety practitioner, what I wanted to then give back to the business and say, look, this is what the situation is, and this is how we can do it. This is the action plan that we could put in place. So I kind of started from that premise. And as you know, Daisy, I think my analogy is it's a big ship. It takes a long time to stop it and turn it round. But it was actually, the door was open and the ship had started to turn. And it was really taking advantage of that opportunity and saying, right, you know, here we are. If there was ever an opportunity to demonstrate to our senior leaders and our employees just how important mental health is in the workplace and the impact that poor mental health has, here it is. So I pulled together quite a lot of information from various sources. The Deloitte report actually is one of them. Absolutely love that. I think I've got a copy of it there. I had the draft international standard on psychosocial wellbeing in the workplace, my experience as a health and safety practitioner, and the work that I had done before around stress risk assessments. And what I knew that I wanted was not something that was just a nice to have. It was something that was going to give us a bit more meat on the bones, because something that, you know, you can't manage what you can't measure. So I wanted to be able to prove that we could make that change. So I pulled all of that research together and said, right, here we are. This is what we can do. Here are some options. Here are the tools that we might be able to use to get there.
I think the only word to summarize that is a very thorough approach to gaining support, which is brilliant, and I guess has led to the success. Arti, I think you'll have a really interesting view from, I guess, both your experience at Ocado and Deloitte. I'd love to hear, what is your experience of gaining support and traction for the initiatives or new campaigns that you're looking to do?
Yeah, so I think everything that Claire alluded to is super important, right? Because that tells the story, and that's definitely elements of stuff that I've used depending on the audience and the stakeholder group that you're talking to. And if I look first at the experiences that I had at Deloitte, the challenge with the environment is that it operates as a massive funnel, right? And I guess you could argue that most businesses operate like that, which means sort of you have your top, but then it gets more and more granular. And the most granular for us were our project teams. And so we could do loads of initiatives for all of consulting or for various areas, but actually the day-to-day impacts were really those project teams. And one of the ways that we started to drive discussion was to actually facilitate conversations for project teams. And in those facilitated conversations, it was always sort of my role to keep the partners in the room. And what happened in those conversations then was that teams were very open and frank about some of the challenges they were facing. And therefore, then that drove the accountability with the partners, right? So they had no choice because they were facing the challenges head on. They are accountable to their teams and the people that they support. And therefore, you would see at the close of those facilitated conversations, those partners immediately look and be like, right, okay, what do we need to do? And kind of just jump on, let's look at the initiatives and the stuff that we could do. And so that was inspiring to watch. It was interesting to see and be able to facilitate. And it was interesting because you would get partners that would be like, I think it's probably best that I leave the room. And you're like, no, you're going to stay and you're going to listen. And then on the flip side in Ocado, it works. I mean, in some cases, the conversation is still fairly in its infancy stage, right? So there's been loads that have been done over the course of Ocado's journey, but as everyone knows, they have literally grown overnight into this massive global organization. And so for them, really now, it's about looking at having almost a data-driven approach to it. So it's looking at things like our engagement survey data and leveraging some of the insights that we're getting from that to tell the story in terms of looking at not just the quant, but the qualitative side of it and hearing what our people are seeing. It's leveraging things like Claire alluded to, like that stress risk indicator from the HSC, and looking at some of that stuff to kind of determine what the right approach is, but also to tell the story, because you can't argue with data. That's the one thing for sure. And that's definitely the way that the leaders in the business at Ocado work in terms of helping them to grasp and understand what we need to do and what is the buy-in actually that we need in order to progress.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear the example from Deloitte of actually having partners in the room. I'm sure that will have been such an incredible experience. And in large organizations, we don't often hear that leadership can always be present for those kind of scenarios. And I love, you touched on there around how important it is to use data and metrics, and that's definitely something I want to come on to. But Claire, I just wanted to come back to you on that. The topic of leadership, Arti, it sounds like for you that was really, really important and something that you factored in. Claire, on the work that you've done, how important has it been to have leadership involved? Because from what I've seen in the last 18 months, suddenly CEOs are talking about mental health and wellbeing, which is incredibly exciting. But I wanted to get your perspective on to what extent that's been important to you at BAE Systems as well.
It has been really important. I've always found that if you get the right sponsorship for whatever it is that you're trying to enact or enable, that helps with opening that door even further, because that leadership, casting the shadow, walking the talk, all that sort of thing is a long-held tradition in health and safety. There's an understanding, particularly if you look at the legislative side of it in the UK, that the person at the top of the tree who has signed that health and safety policy, they are responsible for hazards in their workplace. Now, the fact is that we're moving away and understanding better those psychosocial hazards, but they are responsible. But I learned at a very early stage in my career not to necessarily sit and say to that person, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail, because that doesn't go down well. So it's using the benefits of whatever it is you're doing. It's going to bring you this, it'll bring you increased productivity, it'll improve engagement, it could save money, all that sort of thing. So that was really important. But what was even more important, I think, for me, and what was really a big light bulb moment, is when our sponsor for mental health in the organisation said, doesn't matter how much it is, it's the right thing to do. Yeah. And that was just a fantastic thing. Honestly, I had a smile from ear to ear when he said that. I thought, that's great. But that leadership isn't just in the C-suite. Leaders can be found anywhere that you go in an organisation, and it's tapping in to those people. So, for example, we have a very proactive relationship with our trade union colleagues, and it's getting that out. And I talk about good viruses. So it's thinking about how you can use the good virus to spread the word, spread whatever it is that you're wanting to sell to everybody. So don't always just think that the leadership is that C-suite, that it's somebody sitting at the top of the organisation. find who those people are within the organisation and use them as well.
Yeah, I love another great analogy, Claire. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. We've already mentioned the fact that data is really important to getting support and getting buy-in. And, it wouldn't be a webinar about mental health if we didn't put the question around what's the ROI of mental health and wellbeing. And it probably also wouldn't be one if we didn't also mention that Deloitte report, which handily, Arti, you will know so much more about. We are asked this question all of the time, and I think it's so interesting. What is the return on investment of mental health initiatives, and how can I demonstrate the positive impact, or specifically the financial return? There's lots I could say about this, but I'd love to hear from the two of you. What are your thoughts on ROI? And when you hear that, what do you think? I'm sure, Arti, you'll know so much about the Deloitte report anyway, but I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts on ROI of mental health?
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of it, I'm an accountant. So ROI and like anything financial definitely speaks to me in a lot of different ways. But I feel like with this area, sometimes it's very challenging. And the reasons I'll say it's challenging are the fact that it hasn't been around long enough, right? And so I think there's this idea that actually I think people assume that the minute you start doing initiatives, it's just going to improve right away. But actually, the reality is that the way this works is that the more initiatives you do, and the more you start to create this psychologically safe environment where people can really talk about these things in the workplace, you will actually notice a dip, right? Because people are starting to come to the surface and face the things that they perhaps have been burying. And so with that, it's not really easy to measure an ROI right away. I think the thing that you have to start looking at from an ROI perspective, if you can't get to the numbers, is looking at things like retention rates and exit survey data, and the ability to attract talent. I think what's happening is that if you look at another amazing report that Deloitte's done, glad you think I'd still work there, on the millennials and Gen Zs that they've just released not too long ago, they talk about the shifting workforce and the mentality that they're starting to have, and the importance of things on the whole responsible business agenda, and how that's being sort of something that they're looking at when they look at employers. And if you start looking at, like, is it hard to attract talent? Is it hard to retain talent? Then some of these topics start to become a part of that ROI conversation. And I think that's probably the first place where you have to start kind of looking initially, because I think that financial ability is going to be hard to measure. I think, Daisy, we were talking and I gave you an example of like looking at, if I want to give my business an employee health and wellbeing day, for example, and I'm asked what the return on that is, I think every business will be like, I don't know what the return on that is, because I'm just going to give them a day, and I'll have to kind of give it the time to figure out what the actual investment would be in it, from a money standpoint, I guess.
And it's as you said, it is so tricky to demonstrate that. And it's great that you agree. Coming from an accountant, I feel much better about that. I was keen just to understand, for you, how do you respond to that question then? If someone said, Arti, what's the ROI on this? What is your response? Why would you suggest doing something like that?
I think it goes back to the point that Claire made, right? Which is, it's just the nice thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do, right? I think that's one thing. I think the other element is then trying to sift through all the reports and put some numbers together to build a little bit of a telling business case. I think you have to understand your stakeholder group, right? And if your stakeholder group are the ones that aren't going to necessarily react to the niceties around it being a responsible thing to do from a business perspective, but rather really want to see the numbers behind it, then you have to try to sift through it. I mean, I am definitely in stages now trying to pull numbers and do stuff like that, but I think you have to try in some element or some form to pull on things like that. And I think case studies, again, something that Claire mentioned around, I mean, there's thousands of articles now and case studies on businesses doing great things that are being picked up in the media and all over the news, and it's being able to pick up some of those stories. Because I think that's the other thing that helps build an ROI case, which is, what's the competitor landscape and what's everyone else doing? And do I want to be the last one or the first one in terms of being a trailblazer in this space?
Yeah, I think that almost the maturity curve of what organizations are doing, for me, that Deloitte report really, I think, kicked off such a huge amount of activity. It meant that companies, for the first time, could finally understand, what is the potential financial impact of doing nothing? And I think that really helps when we start talking about ROI, because when you weigh that up against the cost of initiatives, you can see that those initiatives cost such a small amount based on how much ill mental health is costing that organization. Claire, I know for you, the Deloitte report has been instrumental to your strategy, and I, for one, was super impressed seeing the amount of detail that you went into really demonstrating what the financial cost could be to BAE Systems. How important has that data been to you, and what is your view on ROI now?
So it has been really important because, like Arti says, is that there's people who see the benefit, the psychological benefit, the business benefit, but then there's also organisations that are very, very focused on the bottom line, and quite right, because without that bottom line, there's no profit, there's no business. But more and more now, we're hearing more about ESG, so environmental, social governance, and a healthy business is a responsible business. And that is where, your opportunities, I think, really lie. And that's where a lot of the work that I've done has been kind of pushing into the sort of corporate social responsibility. But one of the big things that I think is really telling for managers in an organisation or leaders is the idea of presenteeism. So estimate 45% of employees are at work in body, but not in mind and spirit. So how is that impacting on your productivity? How is that affecting the people around them? Albeit, many of us are still working from home, but I think we can all think back to an experience where we've been in an office and there's been somebody who's not been in the best of moods, and it turns into kind of like a mood hoover, and all that creativity, all the inspiration, all of that good stuff starts to disappear because people are not feeling happy in their work. Work is part of the issue, and good job design is part of the solution. And the other absolutely stunning statistic that I just read the other day was that 41% of employees in the last year have experienced mental health symptoms caused by or worsened by work in the last year. What if that was physical injuries? What if that was 41% of employees had experienced a broken leg? Would we tolerate that? I don't think so. So we just need to, again, it's finding the right box to get into with that person, and whether that is pure return on investment, i.e. we could save this number of days lost, or whether it's more about the qualitative argument, or whether it's more about the employee value proposition. It's finding the right words, the right keywords for that person, and being prepared, like you say, with that document, no matter what way they're going to ask you. If they're not interested in the money, let's talk about the ESG. Not interested in that, let's talk about the performance. So there's always something that you can use in your arguments for the greater good.
Great, thanks, Claire. You mentioned a couple of different standards there, which I'd love to get your thoughts on. Lots of people have been asking us about the new ISO standards. You mentioned the ESG there. To what extent are you familiar with those and using those internally at the moment?
Is that one for me, Daisy?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So here we have one ISO standard, well thumbed. Also, highly recommend that one. Again, well thumbed and looked at. So I'm looking at things, trying to look at it globally. And obviously, again, I'm thinking about things that came out of the management standards by the HSE back in 2002 now, I think it was, and how I can translate that. So that translates really, really well into that ISO standard. So like anything to do with health, safety, quality, finance, energy, environment, if there's a standard there and a framework, then a really good thing to do is use that, because even if you decide not to seek accreditation, then you've got what you need in that document, in that way of working. And it doesn't matter what country you're working in, it doesn't matter what document you're looking at, a good workplace is a good workplace. And the same principles will apply. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about, say, 5 steps to risk assessment or the Australian Productivity Commission's report, and it's section 7 in that, by the way, that I think it marks over quite well. You know, so it's seeing where you can use those things to give you that framework, and treating it just like any other business system.
Yeah, incredibly well versed on these things, Claire. Thank you.
It's sad, really.
I'm sure it will, you know, for all the listeners who will have been thinking, I think for organizations who are much earlier in their journey, you know, looking to things like the ISO standards, thriving at work, you know, it really helps to have a framework when you feel like you're starting from scratch. Arti, I'd love to know from you, you know, what's your thought on some of the latest frameworks and accreditations?
Yeah, so similar to Claire, I've definitely started. So the interesting part about the role at Ocado is I've now been introduced to the whole health and safety world, which was very sort of not something I ever had to engage with before. And so that connection to the ISO standards, for example, is a massive one. And it's definitely something that is on the top of my mind now, starting to look at whether we consider the accreditation or not. And, or like Claire said, just looking at the actual standards to see if there's things that we can pull in, being able to create a really good and healthy workplace. But for Ocado, for sure, the ESG, the whole conversation around the ESG framework is a massive one. It pulls together so many topical areas across the business, not just health and well-being and health and safety, but also diversity and inclusion. So it's such a great framework that connects so many joint conversations. And I'd say that that's definitely one that we are definitely very heavily focused on at the moment, and is something that is taking quite a lot of time and effort just to think through and work through what that means for us, as well as all the stakeholder groups that we have to engage with.
Great, thank you. I'm really interested to quiz you both on what the last 18 months has been like. In the last few minutes of our session, I'm sure all of our listeners are really keen to hear, you know, for you personally, would love to hear kind of how you've managed that, but also what did you do in your respective organizations? What happened in BAE over the last 18 months? What happened in Ocado over the last 18 months? And what examples can you share with the listeners today on what has change look like? So Claire, I'm going to come to you first for that one. Would love to hear what initiatives you've been putting into place.
Well, last 18 months, my hair was a normal colour. No, that's lying, actually. It's not been a normal colour for a good while now. But now I'm just using it to hide the grey that I've developed over the past 18 months. Yeah, for me personally, it was really quite, I hesitate to say it was a good pandemic. What it did for me personally was helped me not be trying to do everything all the time. So personally, there was a benefit there. Not going to lie, don't miss the commute. I'm in a lovely little home office here, and I'm lucky enough to have that. And I really, really appreciate what I've got. And then moving into the new role with the corporate team, coming from the naval ships part of the business, was just a really, really great opportunity to change, have an overall ability to change and make a change that can potentially impact up to 45,000 people. And that professionally feels really good. And I think any opportunity that you get to talk about mental health, to talk about how it impacts in the workplace, let's face it, you spend a significant, number of hours a week working. And I think there's so many other opportunities, other things that you could be doing. So if you are going to spend 40 hours a week at work, then it should be a good work. It should be enjoyable. You should have the right environment, and you should be supported no matter what happens in your life.
I love that. Thank you, Claire. Arti, coming to you. I mean, I guess this last 18 months will have been a huge whirlwind, changing roles, starting in a new organization, leaving in an organization like Deloitte. How has that been for you? And I'd love to know, now that you're in Ocado, what's your view on sort of what their response has been over the last 18 months?
Yeah, so I think starting with how Claire started personally, the pandemic, and I think Daisy, you alluded to it, has been a very interesting one for me. Not only did I leave an organization, but I also had a baby. So experienced the pandemic as a new mom and someone on maternity leave. Definitely put a crinkle in all my plans to have lots of mom breakfasts and fun bonding activity because all of that was closed. We also renovated a house and lived with our in-laws. Everything got extended. So, I mean, I can't really say that the pandemic was amazing. I think there was a lot of silver linings, like being able to have my husband home and have him be able to watch, you know, our little girl grow, which was incredible, and having a bit of that extra family time. But there were definitely a lot of challenges. And I think things like leaving a business and starting a new at a new organization, doing all that virtually, also, you know, you lose a little bit of the buzz that you would have had you been around both offices on both ends. And so that's been a bit of a challenge, but equally, it's been super exciting. I think I went off on maternity leave just before the pandemic hit, and I was really nervous about being, you know, kind of like left behind as the conversation progressed. But actually, I kind of stayed in the conversation the whole time, and actually to see how the conversation has progressed in that time has been incredible to watch. And it's been amazing to join an organization like Ocado, to know that, especially if you look at the UK in terms of how they helped people throughout the pandemic in terms of getting food to people and supporting and being sort of the frontline workers and having people that worked all the way through. It's been incredible to see what Ocado as a business did to support their employees. Equally, it's been amazing to work with such people that are so committed to the greater good. And I think they're not even just at the start. We know we are getting on a trajectory now, which is super exciting to be a part of. And yeah, really, I feel like, you know, there's a lot of good things to look forward to for sure. And like Claire said, these kinds of jobs, you put lots of hours in, but you do it because you have a passion for it. And it's just been so incredible to be surrounded by people that equally feel passionate about it, which has been really nice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much both for those insights and sharing a bit of your personal stories. I think, you know, typically where we would have loved to have done these events in person and we can meet and see people face to face, sometimes we lose some of that human element. So I do appreciate you both sharing with me and with all the viewers today. I was just thinking, you know, in summary, I think we've covered so much, and I'm sure that we could carry on the conversation talking about what does the business case look like. I think some of the key themes for me are, you know, data isn't everything, but it's definitely been important. And from what the two of you have achieved in regards to mental health initiatives, definitely supported you in that. It sounds like researching into these frameworks and accreditations has been useful for both of your businesses, but definitely sounds like, and I remember Claire, you talking about this, the door being ajar and making sure that you keep that door open and keep pushing. So I hope for everyone who has been able to listen and join in today, people do feel inspired that in the wake of the pandemic, the fact that this conversation has opened up significantly, you know, now is the time to act, and now is the time to make these organizations a really great place to work. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining and for posting all these questions. I'm so delighted to have Arti and Claire with us today. We are so grateful for you coming and sharing your insights. And I am thrilled to be handing back over to Steve now. So over back to you, Steve. Thank you, everyone.